Hello, this is me, Brittany Boles, back with another chapter of my unpublished book, Finding Starlight. This video. Usually I do them on Wednesdays, but because it was Christmas, it's now Friday. So welcome to Friday and chapter 10 of my book, Finding Starlight. Again, this is the true story of my life as I remember it, told through the lens of a past life regression session that actually happened. So I hope that you enjoy chapter 10 of my book, Finding Starlight. Chapter 10, Arizona Sky. Arizona? Why there? Katrina asked. My biological father's side of the family lives in Arizona. Remember, I hadn't really connected with them as a child because of the circumstances around his death. Well, one day, my Aunt Lorraine called my dad kind of out of nowhere and asked if I could come visit her in Phoenix. She said she'd been trying to find me for years and that she wanted to get to know me. I don't know how she did it, but somehow she convinced my dad to say yes to the trip. I felt like I had won the lottery. I remember talking to her on the phone. I was 14 years old, and it felt like a dream come true. This is what I had always hoped for. Someone who really wanted me, who knew about my father, found me and offered to take me far, far away. I felt like I was being called home. Meeting her and my uncle, spending time in Arizona under that sky was the best thing that had ever happened to me. That sky, she repeated. You make it sound like a dream come true. It was a fairy tale, and I was a princess, I agreed. When I arrived, I felt loved, sought out, cherished. I felt like a celebrity, or the most important person in the world. They treated me like they had been waiting their entire lives to get to know me, and it meant more than I can describe. I felt like they really saw me. Or rather, they saw in me what I hoped to have: wisdom, maturity, happiness. They told me stories about my father. It was like parts of myself that I so badly wanted to know and to embody, but had no way of knowing existed, were validated. All my life, I had been romanticizing my father, wondering what kind of person he was and how different I would be if I had the chance to know him. He'd become like an imaginary friend or a spirit guide to me. And though I had no way of knowing for certain, I felt like I had a good understanding of who he was. Talking to my aunt and uncle confirmed most of that for me. And the place itself, Arizona, was stunning. The city of Phoenix is fine, but the rest of the places we visited were life-changing. Red rocks, vast, open earth, great towers of stone jutting into the sky. Apache Lake at the top of a mountain, warm and wide, dug into fire-colored cliffs. And there is nothing on earth like the Arizona sky. Cloud couldn't resist such an opportunity to show off. It burst into shades of red, creating a stunning landscape of sky and earth, desert and lake, dreams and memories. The picture was distractingly beautiful. She turned down the bed for me, I said after a moment's awe. The cloud had settled on a scene. My aunt's house, humble and clean, in a simple Phoenix neighborhood, with rocks and cacti instead of a lawn in the front yard, and an above-ground pool in the backyard. She had told me once that her best piece of advice was to live simply and travel well. Home, she said, is just a resting place. Hers felt like the most comfortable and interesting home I had ever seen. I continued, in all my 14 years of life, no one had ever turned down a bed for me. Not my mother or Marion nor my Aunt Cindy had ever done the simple but profound courtesy of making a bed ready for me in that way. I don't know why it struck me so deeply, but that one act made me feel a lifetime of love. She did it every single night, no matter how late I stayed up. She never said a word about it. Just, here you go, sweetie. Lay down your precious head and sleep well. It was the safest, most welcoming feeling. Katrina was nodding along with me, waiting for my story to unfold like a comforter in a long ago bed. My aunt told me stories. She told me that she'd met me when I was a toddler, that she had hosted me for Christmas one year. Of course, there was no way for me to remember. And my mom never told me about that or anything much good about my father's side of the family. I think she held on to resentment about the way everything happened when he died. I do remember Mom having general sentiment toward Aunt Lorraine, though, more so than anyone else she mentioned. My Aunt Lorraine was a bit of a matriarchal black sheep in the family. She had a habit of taking in the kids when their parents screwed up. I learned that most of the kids in my generation had lived with Aunt Lorraine at some point or another. Even my father had spent significant time growing up in her house, and she had become his favorite. My father and my aunt's husband, Uncle Farrell, would play chess and talk about philosophy late into the night. I was delighted to learn that my father was an old soul. Inarguably, he was marked as different. Smarter than most and deeper, too. He had a hard time connecting with people his own age. He wrote and played music. Everyone described him as psychic. He had pretty severe ups and downs and seemed to be the kind of person who never knew just what he truly wanted in life, other than the ever vague more. And the more I learned about him, the more I learned about myself. Well, you're certainly describing him like you do yourself, Katrina agreed. Being immersed in his memories felt like discovering my own innermost self, I realized. Even though I felt like I had known him my whole life, I didn't know what was my intuition and what was just fantasy until that summer. The fantasy was in painting a picture of a perfect man, of course. He was not the perfect father. He wasn't the perfect lover or son or person at all. He did a lot of drugs. He cheated on his wife with my mom. I don't even know, and I don't want to know, all of the bad or good things about him. What I needed to know, I learned. He was as magical and unique, deep and powerful, introspective and philosophical as I had always imagined. And that was enough for me. It helped me come to believe in myself in a way that I hadn't dared to before. What did you come to learn about yourself? Katrina asked. That I wasn't the person that I imagined, that I was the person I imagined I was, rather than the scapegoat that I was painted as, I said. And so it was in Arizona, the summer I was 14, that I began to find myself. I paused and considered how to bring her into this part of my life. It was sacred to me. Part of it was discovering a love of travel, I explained. We went on a road trip through Sedona, into Utah, and then back through Arizona to the Pacific coast in California. Seeing the landscape change from dry desert to lush mountains, red rocks to blue seas, it was everything that fed my soul. Sedona, I decided, was where God lived. Chimney Rock and all the others I can't name stood up from the flat ground like towers or thrones, jutting into the sky. The place vibrated with power and mysticism. And this was long before I knew about vortices and all of that new age stuff. I just felt it in my bones. We visited Bryan Head in Utah and stayed with my aunt's friends in a tiny mountain village called Duck Creek. Since it was summer, it was as lush and vibrant as mountains come. The fields were sprinkled with wildflowers. at the base of silvery gray cliffs. The trees were tall, and they smelled like Christmas. There was wildlife everywhere. Deer in the yard, birds, squirrels, even a fox one day. We fished in a mountain pond as clear and cold as the winter sky, and we stood at the edge of a canyon in Zion National Park that took my breath away. It was pure splendor. All the poetry I know would not be enough to describe the emotion of these places. I have only snippets of memories, like the smell of a fire or the taste of fresh steak, but an indescribable sense of wonder in my heart when I think back to that time. I wish I could tell you more, but I trailed off, lost in thought and the poetry my mind created as I spoke. Our world is full of wonders, Katrina supplemented. And since I can't begin to describe them, I'll go back to what I can. I smiled, like the people and some of the things that we did. Katrina nodded and gestured for me to continue, so I did. My aunt's friends were fabulous. That's the only word I can use to describe them. Diana, for instance, was this tall, blonde goddess woman who ran her own successful company. She overflowed with charisma and kindness. She hosted a big trip up to Apache Lake in the Arizona mountains at a resort. She had 2 teenage sons, Jason and Chris. Jason and I were 14 and 15 and I had a sense that there was a bit of matchmaking going on behind the scenes with my aunt and Diana. I wagged my eyebrows suggestively. And did that match make? My fairy friend asked, with one of her own eyebrows lifted. Good question, I said, biting my lower lip. That first summer, I definitely caught the crush. He was tall, blonde, and cheerful. A good-looking guy, well-adjusted, friendly. I was a skinny little thing, more than a bit nerdy, and had about 0 confidence or interest in my ability to engage a guy like that. And we had a great time together. He was charming, we laughed a lot. One night we walked out to his boat on the dock to stay up, gazing at the stars. It was a warm night. The water gently rocked the boat beneath us. Every single star was visible on the sky, like a billion million lights reflecting off the cliffs, off the water, out of our own eyes. Talk about a romantic evening. I remember it more for the sky and for the peacefulness than I do for the romance, though, I admitted. The stars felt so close, I could almost touch them. That sky is another sacred place I go in my mind, not unlike this forest. It sounds like a lovely scene, she said. During the day, I continued, the adults anchored the boat to hang out while the kids climbed and jumped off the cliffs. I thought I was brave, but once I got to the top of the cliff, I totally froze. It was at least 2 stories high. Jason sat up there with me for what felt like hours before I finally built up the courage to jump. Then, of course, I had to climb right back up and do it a few more times. I shook my head. Ridiculous. We had one passionate night in the hotel room. We kissed and did some very heavy petting. I almost thought we would, go all the way that night. But mercifully, I was just finishing my period, and that was enough to keep me sensible. I had my Christian beliefs at that point, after all, I said in as prudish a voice as I could muster, making Katrina giggle. Honestly, though, that would have been a much better first time than the one I ended up having. Ugh, but that's a different story. Let's keep this one light, shall we? She nodded agreement, enjoying the break from hard and heavy, too. So, Diana hosted my aunt and me, plus a whole gang of friends and family up at Apache Lake. Let's see. I told you about Jason, obviously. He and I had our puppy love thing going on, which only lasted that one summer, for me anyway. His younger brother, Chris, brought up a bunch of friends too, and they were so much fun. Thrill seekers. We rode a bike off a jump into the lake. That was exciting. Just Pure shenanigans the whole time. Justin was another kid that came that year with his mom, Marcella, who was my aunt's oldest friend from way back when. Marcella and Justin lived right down the road from my aunt in Phoenix, so I spent as much time with them as we did with Jason and Diana. It was weird because they were about as different as people can be, but still good friends. Diana and Jason were rich, at least by my standards. Their house was a mansion made of marble, like something out of a movie. I can't be certain, but it seemed like Diana footed most of the bill for all the vacations we went on together. It was her boat and her toys we always played with while we were there. Marcella and Justin lived in a small apartment in a regular downtown Phoenix neighborhood. Justin was cheerful but distant. His real mom and Marcella had been lovers before his mom went down a troubled path. She left him with Marcella, whom he adopted as another mom. It was a lot like my situation in some ways, which is why I was drawn to Justin. I felt like he understood what it was like to have a hard life. He didn't like to talk about it, though, so we mostly kept our friendship to action stunts and punk rock. That first summer, anyway. I hinted at something I'd get into later and kept myself on track. That summer was luxurious. My aunt and her friends seemed like the happiest, most carefree people in the world. I had always wanted to be in a group like that. We were the loud ones on the beach, the fast boat going by on the lake. We stayed out late and laughed like nobody could hear us. Everyone was affectionate and positive, and it seemed like the number one priority was fun. We ate well, listened to music, got to know each other's families like our own. I belonged there in that lifestyle. It wasn't the money or the lack of it that hooked me. It was the gusto, the enthusiasm for life, for each other, for experience. That's what made an impression. I thought, when I grow up, this is the kind of person I want to be. These are the kinds of friends that I will have. My aunt's friends revered her and each other. Her best friend at the time was Terry Ann, a Mexican lady with the biggest smile and best hugs. She called my aunt Queenie. We met Terry's family too, and it was just what you'd think. They were Mexican through and through. Those bossy mamas served some delicious food. Her dad was a sweet old guy, the kind that kisses you on the cheek and asks for a dance. They introduced me to real tamales and enjoying your own front porch. Everything we did together as a group. Water parks, road trips, restaurants, every bit of joyfulness and fun we could squeeze into 6 weeks were shared with the group I decided to refer to as everyone. That everyone very nearly became my everyone. I confided. Arizona felt so much like home, it was obvious. They all asked me if I would stay, said I deserved to stay after all these years. My aunt did invite me. She said her door was always open, that I could make the choice anytime I wanted. But, being a wise woman, she told me to think seriously. She pointed out that we were all on vacation and that life wasn't always this glamorous. She reminded me to think of my sister. That brought me back down to earth. As much as I yearned to get away from my frigid Minnesota life, my heart lived with Amber. We were a unit, an inseparable pair of people who were each other's anchor and buoy in a stormy, violent sea. There was nowhere I would go for long where I couldn't bring my sister. So, like all vacations do, my trip to Arizona came to an end. We said, "See you later," and I boarded the plane back to a place that no longer felt like home. And that concludes chapter 10 of Finding Starlight, my as yet unpublished creative nonfiction, currently seeking publication. Thank you so much for listening if you've gotten this far with me. Yay! And if you're just tuning in now, you can catch up on all of the chapter videos on my website or my YouTube page, brittanyboles.com. So Thanks so much, and I will see you next Wednesday with Chapter 11, Legally an Orphan. Until then.